Now, what I'd like to do in the rest of this video is show a more general solution to this problem that we have been working with of converting a none or an option to a ZIO value. To do that, what I have done is change the code a little bit here. So I have the URL up here and I have a couple of notes about what we should test. I didn't test this earlier, this second one here, so I want to do that later as well. And what I did first of all was I created this function called getURLContent. So it takes a URL as a string and it returns what we had before, which is the any throwable and then the option of a string. And I went back to using timeout right here, so that's why that works that way. So you've seen this code already. And now that this ZIO here is going to have a throwable in the failure case and an option over here in the success case, what I want to do eventually is to create a function to handle that and basically get rid of the option in the success case. So I want to get back to what we had before, which is the ZIO of a throwable and a string, but I want a more general solution to this problem than what I had before. And specifically, I don't want to use timeout fail. I want to use something that's more general. So to show you what I mean, what I have in mind is I want to have a for expression in here, and then I'm going to have something like a maybe string here. And that's going to call get URL content with that URL right there. So I say maybe string because that's going to be an option of string in the success case. So that's why that's there. And then what I want to do is say, well, I want to have the final result here. And that's going to be my new function. And I want to name this something like option to ZIO. I might come up with a different name as we go along. But the idea is I want to pass maybe string into that. And I also want to pass the exception in here or the error value here that I want to have when something fails. So I'm going to say that in the case of this function right here and in the case of maybe string, the final error I want is going to be that timeout exception. So I'll have a timeout exception and I'll give that a string and say something like, well, that operation timed out like that. And then I want to yield that result when things are done. So this code here gives you a ballpark idea of what I want. So I'm going to copy that, and of course I want a new function here. It's going to have that name. This maybe string here tells you that this is going to be an option, and it's specifically going to be an option, and we'll call it, it's going to have the generic type A. So whenever you use a generic like that, you have to put it over there. So that's the first part. And then the second part, I generally want to handle as an error. And I could handle that as an error with the type E. So I'll actually go ahead and throw that other generic type here as the E. But it's actually going to be a little more flexible for us to use a call by name parameter right here. So that's what the second one is going to be, is that call by name parameter right there. And I'll try to remember to talk more about this in the future. So it could just be the option of E like that, but I believe it's going to be more flexible like this. And then when this function succeeds, it's going to return a ZIO. And for right now, I'll just say that it can take any environment. Might be able to fix that more later. But right now, it'll work in any old environment. And then the error is going to be that E value that we're passing in right here. So a key of this function is it's going to transform this option here into a potential error here. So we're going to have a success value and an error value. So indeed, we're going to have the error value there and then the success value here. That's what we're going to return out of this function. And actually what I want to do is come back here real quick. And I want to put that comment that the purpose of this function is to convert an option of A to a ZIO with this type that I just discussed right here. And let me fix that real quick. Give me a little more room there. And actually, you know how anytime you put a comment in here, you might think about changing your code. That's what I'm thinking right here. So I'm going to say convert option to ZIO, and then I can get rid of that. So maybe that's a better name right there, is to convert an option to a ZIO value. And now the way we do this in here is we say, well, I want to do a ZIO. I want to do a from option, and I've shown that in other videos. So I'm going to do a from option on the option that we're getting in. And then here we can do a couple of different things. And this is what I intended to show earlier in this video, but I got sidetracked when I showed that timeout fail. That is a very specific solution for this timeout problem, to use timeout fail. And I want to show a more general solution. So that's why I'm doing this here. So what I'm going to do here is say I can do a couple of things again. One is going to be I can map that error. So this is a rare case where I'm going to say I want to transform a unit to an error. So again, most people would probably use an underscore here, but I am specifically going to use unit there. And now the reason I'm thinking about including unit right here will take a little bit of explanation. So let me say, how about val temp equals that? And then if I hover over temp, you'll see the type here. And actually, I may be wrong here. My understanding was that from option would return a unit value here. And I'm sorry that keeps jumping away on me. But I had in my mind that error value was going to be a unit. And here the compiler shows it as an option of nothing instead of the usual nothing. I reverted this code a little bit to go back to what we had before. And I'm looking in here, and that's where you see that option of nothing. And that's effectively a none because nothing has no instances. So the only possible value of option of nothing is none. And I don't want this code to be misleading, so I'm going to change it back to an underscore. So again, I had it in my mind that was a unit value coming out of there, but it's actually that very unusual type, which is an option of nothing. So I am just going to use the underscore there like that. So that part might be good there. Let me copy that and paste that there and save that. And I can scoot this back over here and let's get this started. So this shows the success case right here. And if the output was better, you see that this is a multi-line string right here. So if I come over to this success case, you'll see that indeed is a string. So I call that maybe string there, and then we could say this would be maybe the URL content or something like that. So call that content, call that one content, and call this one content as well. So again, that's the success case right there, and you'll see that this will run again here. And now I want to verify that I've covered all the errors, so if we come up here and we change that to 2 milliseconds and save that, we see that we have the timeout exception as desired. So that is our code in action. That's this timeout exception working right here. And then if I go back here, I just want to make sure I have the other errors covered. So now if I put a blank space in there, that was my first comment, you'll see that is a URI syntax exception. And then I noticed during some other testing that if you change that, this actually is a different error here. And that one is an unknown host exception. So you can see that our code has 3 potential exceptions or errors. So it has that timeout exception, the URI syntax exception, and then the unknown host exception. And that's important because I want to do some other things a little later. Now, one more thing I want to do before we move on is I want to say that the reason I did this, the primary reason I created this as a call by name parameter, is for lazy evaluation purpose. And what I mean by that is that the error value is only going to be constructed if and when it's needed. And in our case, that's only created if the option is a none. And that's when the code comes down right here, and then that's actually going to be used. So this code that we're passing into here is what I'm talking about. And another thing to note is that because this is a call by name parameter, this could actually be more complicated if we need to be. But in general, the main thing I'm looking for right here is lazy evaluation in this case. There could be a couple of other benefits in other situations. Like if you were using this error multiple times inside this function, that's another reason you'd use a call by name parameter. But in this particular case, I'm just using it for lazy evaluation. So what I showed in this first case here was map error. And there's actually another way we could handle that option value right there. And some people will say this one is more direct, and this one is or else fail with that error like that. So instead of using map error and mapping that option of nothing to the error value right here, what I'm doing in this one is just saying just fail with this error here. So let me go ahead and save that. And then I need to come back up here and change that. And then I want to come back over here and test this part of the code right there. And there we see that timeout exception. So the only thing I want to note here was that the previous solution was map error, and now I'm using or else fail. And in this particular case, I think or else fail probably is a little more direct solution, so I'm going to go ahead and keep that. And now the next thing I want to note is that currently this function is returning that option of string, so I have to have my general convert option to ZIO function in this code right here. And what I'd like to do is fix this get URL content function so that it returns a string here and uses this convert option to ZIO function inside of here. So what I mean by that is I don't like the way this function works like this with this option of string. I shouldn't really impose this type of solution on anyone else. I should take care of this problem myself where I return a none even in a timeout exception case. So what I'm saying is I want to make that a string, and then eventually I want to return a timeout exception out of here. And now what I'm going to do is just tighten this code up a little bit. And I could have tightened this code up before, but I'm doing that now. And now what I'm saying is coming out of this timeout here, I have that maybe string that I'm referring to over here, that option of string. And what I can do in this code here is flat map that. And now I could say I want that maybe string here. And then I want to handle the conversion right here. So I could just cut that code out of there and put it in here. And I believe that should solve that problem. So let me look at this real quick. So going from here to here, I was returning an option. And now what I'm saying is I want to flat map on that option and have that maybe string come into here and then convert that to this timeout exception in the case of failure. So I still need this here. So I believe that code is correct, and then I still have this code here. And now this code right here is going to be quite a bit simpler, isn't it? So that should just be like that. So let me save that. And cool, now we still see that timeout exception there. So again, if I didn't explain that well, what I was trying to do was make this function all-inclusive or self-inclusive, and I wanted to handle this problem myself. So now as you're seeing here, when I get the none value, I am transforming that into the timeout exception, and that's what's coming out of here. And then what I want to do is just go back and make sure all the success cases work, so I'll go ahead and save that. And you see that that works right there, and then this failure case should work as well. And there we get that URI syntax exception, and then this one should work as well. And we get that unknown host exception, which is exactly what I want. So now I'll say that I am happy with this function. I'm also happy with this general function, and I want to note that this function right here that I have blinking is the primary purpose for this extra portion of this video, was to show you how to handle this problem in general. And again, you can do that with or else fail, and you can do it with map error as I showed earlier. Now, one more thing I want to do is show how to do something a little more complicated right here. So I noted previously, and you can see a couple of the exceptions over here, is that this failure over here is a throwable. And the way we can deal with that, knowing that these are the only exceptions we're going to get, is I can get rid of that. And now what I want to say is I want to do a match expression over here. And I'm going to throw in some curly braces because I always forget this part right here. You need that comma in between these two because this is the first parameter for fold ZIO, and then this is the second parameter for fold ZIO. So you need that comment right there. And now we can just fill in the case statements over here. So we could say case, and I will come over here and say that is that one right there. So that's going to be exception number 1. And then I want to do something with that. And then we're going to have case exception number 2 is going to be that guy right there, unknown host exception. And we'll handle that as well. And in case 3 is going to be, where's my timeout exception? There it is right there. That one right there. That's going to be the third possible exception that could come out of our code or out of our blueprint. And now I want to handle all 3 of those. So they're all going to be print line errors like that. And now I could just fill those in and say, well, that's a URI error. And this one is an unknown host error, and then this one would be the timeout error. And if I typed everything right there, I'll save that. And because our code is set up for success, we get the success value. Now let's work through these. We'll check that one. And there we go. That's the unknown host error. And then we get this URI error as shown there. And now as I change that, we get that timeout error right there. And I just noticed I should pass in that timeout value here, shouldn't I? So I would make that a timeout in milliseconds, and that could be an int or a long. I'll just make that an int. So we'll call it timeout milliseconds. Put that one right there. And then we need to pass it in here. And normally you'll do something like 10 seconds or 20 seconds or 30 seconds, depending on how patient you are there. So let's just check and make sure that code works. Okay, so I just checked my notes, and it looks like I covered everything I wanted to. So let me expand this, and we'll go over it one more time. What I did was I wanted a self-contained function that would return a ZIO, and specifically, it would either return a string in the success case or a throwable when we had the timeout exception. So that's why I made all these changes that I made right here. Another key is that we now have a function that is pretty general purpose, and this function will help us convert an option to a ZIO value. So we get this option here, and then we also receive the desired error value right here, and we transform that into this type signature here. And the way I'm doing that right now is I use from option on that option, and then I say or else fail with this error. And as I showed earlier, you could also use map error here, but I think or else fail is a better solution in this case. The blueprint now is pretty simple, and it's actually a little bit of overkill. You could just use a flat map here if you wanted to, but I'm not too concerned about that. And then what I did down here was I expanded on things we can do inside of fold ZIO, and specifically I showed how we could handle the failure case here with a match expression, because we know that these are the types of exceptions that we can get out of our code up here. So once again, I hope everything here makes sense, and it will be helpful in your ZIO programming career.